There's a particular quality to a city that has crows in it. You might not have named it before, but you felt it. They're on the power lines when you leave in the morning. They're walking the parking lots with that unhurried, slightly arrogant stride, like they've assessed the situation and decided nothing here is worth rushing for. They're in the trees, on the rooftops, at the edges of things, always watching, always processing, always present in that way that makes you feel occasionally like the observed rather than the observer. And then evening comes. The light shifts, the shadows stretch, and somewhere in that slow transition between afternoon and dark, something happens that most people never consciously register. The crows disappear. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just gradually, the wires empty. The parking lots go quiet. The trees that had movement in them go still. And if you happen to be paying attention at exactly the right moment, you might catch the last few dark shapes crossing the sky before the color drains out of it completely. And then they're gone. No sound, no trace, just the sudden, strange absence of something you didn't realize you'd been tracking until it wasn't there anymore. So where do they go? That question sounds simple. It isn't. Because the answer opens into something much larger than the nightly habits of a bird. It opens into a world that runs parallel to ours, organized and complex, and completely invisible, operating through the hours when most of us have stopped paying attention to anything outside our windows. If questions like this one are the kind that stay with you, consider subscribing to the channel. What's ahead in this video is going to be worth staying for. The first thing to understand is that crows don't disappear randomly. There's no scatter, no individual drift into the dark. What looks like a gradual vanishing is actually the opposite. It's a convergence. As the light fades, crows from across a wide area begin moving in the same direction, toward the same destination, following routes that in some cases have been used for decades. They're going to a roost. Roosts are communal sleeping sites, specific locations that crows return to night after night, season after season, sometimes year after year. And the scale of them is something that most people, even those who live near one, have no idea about. A roost isn't a few birds in a tree. A roost can be hundreds of crows. In some documented cases, thousands, tens of thousands, gathered in a relatively contained area, in trees chosen with a precision that reveals exactly how deliberate this behavior is. The selection criteria for a roost location are not arbitrary. Height matters, elevation provides visibility, and makes approach by ground predators harder to execute quietly. Surrounding openness matters. A roost site with clear sight lines in multiple directions gives the group time to respond to anything approaching from a distance. Proximity to escape routes matters. Proximity to food sources for the following morning matters. These aren't instinctive preferences in a vague sense. They're specific, consistent, and transferable. Younger crows learn roost locations by following older ones, which means the knowledge of where to go at night is socially transmitted across generations, the way directions to a place might be passed down in a family. There's an extended exploration of this kind of socially transmitted knowledge in crows, and how it compares to similar behavior in primates and cetaceans, available through the link in the video description and in the first comment. It goes considerably deeper than what we have time to cover here, but I want to stay with the roost for a moment longer, because what happens inside one at night is where this gets genuinely surprising. Because crows aren't just sleeping there. Research into roost behavior has produced findings that shifted the way scientists think about what these gatherings are actually for. The leading hypothesis, supported by a growing body of observational and experimental data, is that roosts function, at least in part, as information exchanges. Not in a metaphorical sense, in a functional behavioral sense. Crows that have found reliable food sources during the day appear to be followed from the roost the following morning by other crows that didn't know about those sources. The roost in this model acts as a recruitment center, a place where the question of where to find food tomorrow gets answered through a process of social observation that researchers are still working to fully decode. Think about what that means for a moment. Every night, in a stand of trees somewhere near where you live, thousands of birds are gathered in the dark, and the gathering itself is doing something. Processing the day, distributing information, preparing for tomorrow. It isn't rest in the passive sense we usually mean when we use that word. It's something more like a nightly coordination meeting, held in a language we don't speak, in a location we almost never think to look. Here's a question that's worth actually pausing on. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something had changed in the silence around you? Not a sound exactly, just a difference in the quality of the quiet. Something that pulled you out of sleep before you could identify what it was? Crows live in that state deliberately. They practice what's known as unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, a capacity shared with many bird species and with some marine mammals that allows one hemisphere of the brain to enter a sleep state while the other remains active and alert. In practical terms, this means that at any given moment during the night, a significant portion of the crows in a roost are functionally awake, processing, monitoring. One eye literally open, because the open eye corresponds to the active hemisphere, scanning the environment for anything that doesn't belong. The roost that looks silent from the outside is, from the inside, a distributed surveillance network. Thousands of individual monitoring systems, operating in rotating shifts, covering the darkness in overlapping fields of attention. If something moves at the edge of the roost, a predator, an unfamiliar shape, a sound that doesn't fit the expected acoustic pattern of that location at that hour, the response can propagate through the group in seconds. What looks to a human observer like a sudden inexplicable eruption of movement and sound from a stand of trees at 2 in the morning is actually a perfectly coordinated alarm cascade, triggered by a perception that no human present would have been able to detect. And that points to something worth sitting with, the fact that even in the dark, crows are perceiving things that fall completely outside human sensory range. Sound arrives at the roost before movement does. Crows can detect and process audio signals at frequencies and distances that allow them to register the approach of something significant well before it enters visual range, even in conditions of near total darkness. Beyond sound, there are subtler signals, changes in air pressure, shifts in temperature, alterations in the electromagnetic qualities of the environment that precede weather changes by hours. The sudden restlessness of a roost, birds repositioning, vocalizing briefly, then settling again, often has no visible cause. That doesn't mean there was no cause. It means the cause was operating on a frequency that the humans nearby couldn't access. The darkness doesn't limit what crows perceive. In some respects, it focuses it. What's also worth understanding is that the roost is not just a functional space. It's a cultural one. The specific location, the specific routes used to reach it, the specific trees preferred within it, these aren't rediscovered each season, by each generation of crows independently. They're learned, passed on. A juvenile crow doesn't find the roost by instinct. It finds the roost by following adults who know where it is, the way a child learns the layout of a neighborhood, by walking it with someone who already knows every turn. This means that some roost sites carry history. They've been used not just for years, but for decades. In documented cases, for generations of crows that have come and gone, while the location itself persisted. The trees have changed. The surrounding landscape has changed. The individual birds have entirely turned over. But the roost remains, because the knowledge of it was continuously transferred from those who remembered to those who were learning. That's not instinct. That's culture. The same mechanism, operating at a different scale, that allows human communities to maintain traditions across generations of people who never knew the ones who started them. There's something quietly astonishing about that, if you let it land. If this is the kind of content that makes you look at the world a little differently, subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and drop a comment below. It genuinely helps, and it's how more people find their way to ideas like these. There are things happening right now, tonight, within a few kilometers of wherever you're reading this, that you have no direct access to. A roost, maybe? A convergence of hundreds of birds in a location you've never thought to look, doing something that the science of animal behavior is still in the process of fully understanding. Communicating in patterns we haven't decoded, sleeping in shifts so that the group is never fully unguarded, perceiving the night through sensors that register signals you couldn't detect even if you were standing in the middle of it. The crows didn't disappear when the light faded. They concentrated. They organized. They became, in the dark, something more coordinated and more complex than what you saw during the day, just in a place and at a frequency that you weren't equipped to observe. So the next time you notice the wires going empty at dusk, that quiet, gradual erasure of dark shapes against a fading sky, you'll know what you're actually watching. Not an ending. A departure toward something. A nightly migration toward a gathering that has been happening, in one form or another, for longer than any individual crow has been alive. And somewhere in that stand of trees, as you settle into sleep, one eye stays open, watching, waiting for whatever the night decides to bring. If that image is one you want to carry with you, share this video with someone who would stop and look twice at an empty wire at dusk. And subscribe, because where this goes next is somewhere most people never think to look.